Hello, everybody. We're here today to talk about diction. Diction is word choice. It's the decisions an author makes at the level of individual words in what they're writing. We're going to talk about some ways of categorizing diction because very often diction in a text is going to be sort of unified. Authors are going to make very similar decisions about words throughout. It's one of the things that gives them voice. It's an important element in establishing persona. And if you can understand why an author makes the diction choices that they do, you often go a long ways towards understanding their purpose. So one of the first elements of diction we're going to talk about is what we could call the ladder of abstraction. We can describe any word as being either concrete or abstract. Any noun, I should say. Concrete nouns are things that can be perceived with the senses. If you can see it, smell it, touch it, taste it, then it's and that was 4, so I forgot one, but then it's a concrete noun. Abstract nouns are words that can't be perceived with the senses. They're things that sort of exist maybe only in the mind. But the idea of the ladder of abstraction is to point out that there's actually a lot of sort of shades of gray in that there's a lot of sort of differentiation along the way from something being entirely concrete to being entirely abstract. So let's start with a really concrete word like paper. Paper is something that wholly sort of exists in the real world, right? If I say paper, everyone can visualize it. You can touch paper. You can smell it. Paper is very, very concrete. It's a little bit more concrete than the idea of a book. Books are still awfully concrete. If I threw one at you, you could definitely feel it, you can see it, you can smell it. Books are real and exist in the real world. But if you start to think about it, there's sort of varying definitions for what a book might be. There might be sort of creative ways to define a book. If I say book, different people might conceive of that in different ways, right? And a book could exist in some ways that maybe are divorced from real, concrete, tangible paper. So a book is a bit more abstract. Then go to a concept like words. Again, words seem pretty concrete, but they're even less concrete than books are. Because words, when they exist sort of printed on a page, are definitely something you can see. But they can also exist sort of in the mind. And words are kind of random and have meaning because we've decided that they do, and it's kind of this code that we're using. So we're moving a little bit further away from the physical world when we go from an idea like a book to an idea like words. We're going to make a big jump now from words to messages. Messages, again, they exist in the real world. You see a message, you hear a message, right? But you hear sounds and then maybe your mind turns it into a message. This is definitely one that's transitioning towards the abstract, right? Even though they have sort of things that they correspond to in the physical world, like the words that are in that book that's made of paper sort of make up messages. Different people can interpret them in really different ways. Messages are a lot more abstract than words. But certainly messages are more concrete than thoughts. Thoughts are even more abstract. Thoughts now really don't exist in the physical world anymore. Now we're talking about things that only exist in the mind, though you can sort of share them back and forth. Maybe thoughts are even a little bit less abstract than ideas, right? A thought implies that it's sort of happening right now in the present in your mind, right? But an idea is more constant. It's more sort of separated even from time. And then let's move all the way up to an idea like education. Education is extremely abstract and means lots of different things, and its sort of connection to the physical world only flows through about 4 different levels of concrete nouns. So if we start with paper and move all the way up to education, we've sort of climbed that ladder of abstraction. Good essays are going to balance concrete concepts with abstract ones. A big mistake that students make, especially when they are sort of writing their first couple AP essays, is writing things that are entirely too abstract, that don't exist in the real world. One of the most common things that authors are told is to show instead of tell. You have to use concrete nouns to show us these abstract ideas that you're talking about. An easier concept that I'm going to summarize pretty quickly here is when we're talking about formal versus informal language, and sort of common language versus language that is less specific, that is less commonly accepted, slang and jargon. So take a look at this sentence. I'd like to think you've blogged your responses to K-Money's journal prompts. Now, this sentence is very informal. It does things that we don't do in formal writing. It has contractions, I'd and you've, right? It uses both the first and second person. In formal writing, you really shouldn't use either, so it has I and you in it. So it's very informal because of the sort of the way it directly addresses the reader from the speaker and uses contractions. And then notice how it also includes a lot of slang and jargon. Jargon is language that's known by a specific group of people, maybe people who share a common hobby or a job. So a word like blog, even though at this point blog has pretty well entered widely accepted usage, blog is a kind of jargon, right? Journal prompts, we could look at that as being a kind of jargon. You know, if you're in my freshman class or in my AP class, you know about journal prompts in a way that maybe wouldn't make sense to someone who isn't part of the class, so it's a jargon. And, you know, people have a tendency to refer to me to K-Money, which we could look at as being slang, as being kind of an informal language used by a specific group of people. So slang is like a type of jargon. So this sentence is very informal, and it's kind of specific to particular groups of people who would understand it. Contrast it to this sentence. It is expected that all students have entered their responses to Mr. Kennedy's short informal essay prompts in the online journal. Notice how this is now very formal. No more contractions, no more first or second person. It's done entirely in the third person. We've also eliminated a lot of those jargon, slang kind of words and used a kind of common language that can be understood by people everywhere. Generally speaking, this is the kind of language you're going to want to use in formal writing, like an AP essay. There are certain situations in which you might want to use first person, but that's almost exclusively limited to personal experience. If I went to Disney World last year and it's a prompt about Disney World, then you might end up using it, but it's pretty rare. There's K-Money's album, It's Just the Beginning. I discovered this when I did a Google image search for K-Money. Okay, next let's talk about the difference between Anglo-Saxon and Latinate words. Brief history lesson. English comes from the country of England. Didn't know if you knew that, but there you go. And the people in England for a long time spoke a version basically of Old German. And those people were called the Angles and the Saxons. So we can refer to that language as being kind of an Anglo-Saxon language. Then in 1066, the Normans, led by William the Conqueror, invaded. They came from Normandy, which is in present-day France. And they spoke a version of French, which is a Latinate language, a language that's based on Latin. And the Normans took over England and brought their language with them. So in the English language, we often use a combination of Anglo-Saxon and Latinate words. And there are some interesting trends there. And you'll notice how those trends might apply to your writing in terms of if you're using a lot of Anglo-Saxon words or a lot of Latinate words. Anglo-Saxon words have a tendency to be short. They have a lot of consonants in them, hard consonants, K's and D's and P's and things like that. All the good swear words are Anglo-Saxon words. And they have a tendency to be a little bit more immediate, a little bit more descriptive of things in the real world, a little bit simpler. So there's a column of words here that are all Anglo-Saxon words. And I'm going to start bringing up sort of their Latinate counterparts, and you'll notice some of the differences. The first one actually came from the reading packet. Kind is an Anglo-Saxon word. Magnanimous is a Latinate word. So notice Latinate words almost always involve prefixes and suffixes. So if you have something with like an OUS ending, right, that's going to be Latinate. Also, this one has that mag prefix. The differences in meaning are subtle, but important. To be magnanimous is a much more sort of specific way to behave than being kind. It carries with it connections of social status, right? Magnanimity comes from people who are superior to others. And keep in mind, as I said, that the Normans, the ones who spoke the Latinate language, conquered England. So one trend we notice is that Latinate words often have to do with power and authority. Anglo-Saxon words have to do with physical labor and with the physical world. So for example, the Anglo-Saxon word deer is connected to the Latinate word venison. And that's a trend that you actually notice. One of the things that shows you how history is written in language is that Anglo-Saxon words are often used for animals, cow, pig, whereas Latinate words are used for the food products that are made from them, like venison or beef, for example, is a Latinate word. So you can see in looking at the language that the Angles and the Saxons were the people who worked with the livestock, and the Normans were the people who enjoyed eating it. An Anglo-Saxon word is a word like king, but a word like government is a Latinate word. Notice how much more complicated and more abstract an idea like government is than king. It's more sophisticated, it's more subtle, right? It implies lots of different things. Kings are much more direct and immediate. Anglo-Saxon gives us a word like God. Latinate gives us the word religion. It's, so God is one sort of specific thing, or if it was plural, like if you're Vikings and you worship a lot of gods, they're sort of distinct individuals. Religion, again, is a big sort of complicated thing that often involves social rank. An Anglo-Saxon would say that someone had died, but if you were speaking a more Latinate language, you would say that they expired, just like an Anglo-Saxon word would be that that person lived, but in Latinate they existed. So notice, again, prefixes are a clue for Latinate. And both the Anglo-Saxon words carry implications of things that happen sort of in the real world. To live and die has a lot to do with whether or not there's like oxygen being processed in your body. But to exist or expire seems to have more to do with sort of the soul and life energy and things like that. Anglo-Saxon people, we're using Anglo-Saxon language we love, but in Latinate languages, in Latinate words, we have romance. Right? Again, love is something sort of immediate and direct. It's a verb much more often than romance is. Romance involves a lot of sort of social codes and things like that. In Anglo-Saxon, we might learn. In Latinate, we comprehend. Learning is something you can do sort of with muscle memory. Right? You can learn to hit a baseball by practice, but you comprehend the rules of baseball by studying them. When people want to sound smart, they often use a lot of Latinate words, and they inflate their diction by using them. Another habit that writers have to be broken of, generally speaking, Anglo-Saxon words are better because they're more immediate and more direct. Obviously, there's all kinds of circumstances in which you want to use the Latinate word because of some particular shade of meaning or because you're talking about a complicated concept. But unless there's a reason to use it, you should use the Anglo-Saxon word. You shouldn't go out of your way to say that someone is acting magnanimously if they're being kind. All right, so often in diction, we want to take the shortest distance between 2 points. And there's a tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. I put that in there because I decided that Hamlet does virtually all of those things. He comprehends things, he engages in romance, he exists, and he expires. Religion is actually really important to Hamlet, and he's obviously part of government. Maybe at some point in the play he eats some venison, and of course Hamlet is magnanimous. And Hamlet is very complicated and sophisticated, so it makes sense to associate it with Latinate words. The last thing that we're going to talk about today is the difference between denotation and connotation. Though in a way, that's what we've been talking about throughout this video. This is one that you've probably been taught before, but just for the sake of a refresher, all words have both a denotation and a connotation. The denotation of a word is its dictionary definition, what it literally means. All words obviously have a denotation, something that they mean. Connotation is the emotional association with it. And all words have a connotation of some degree or another, though some words have stronger connotations than others. So in the left-hand column, I put a bunch of words with generally positive connotations. And now let's look at some examples of words that have the same denotation, that mean the same things, but carry a more negative connotation. So generally speaking, it's a compliment to call someone thin. To say that they're skinny carries more of an implication that you want to give them a sandwich. If you decide to enter a career in public service, you're going to run for office, it's complimentary to call you a statesman. It's often a criticism to call you a politician. Everyone would love to be a genius. Not as many people like to be nerds, although there is, I suppose, some denotative difference between those two. It's a good thing to be passionate about something. It's less good to be crazy about something. When teachers are trying to praise you or motivate you to do the right thing, they call you young adults. When you're in trouble, you might get called a juvenile, especially if you're in trouble with the legal system. It's nice to be childlike. It's bad to be childish. It's good to be economical. It's bad to be stingy. It's nice if a test is challenging. It's bad if it's hard. Though one of the things you're probably already noticing is that connotation is often flexible. Sometimes it's good to be skinny. Sometimes it's a compliment to be crazy, right? To be a crazy fan of a football team or to be crazy about somebody. Those can be positive things. So connotation is more flexible than we sometimes realize. With virtually all elements of diction, to determine if it's like good diction or bad diction, you have to look at the context of the entire work. So those are quite a few different ways to describe the diction of a piece. You can use all of these to start looking for general trends, right? Trying to pick out, is this essay too abstract? Is it dealing with concepts that are very concrete? Right? Is it formal? Is it informal? And so on. So look for trends, look for things that break those trends, but keep in mind that good writing is going to take advantage of a lot of these different kinds of diction.